Bonjour et bienvenue sur notre leçon à la maison. Nous sommes sur la leçon numéro 3, chapitre 2. On fait la fête. On fait la fête. And here's our overview. In this lesson, we are going to learn what indirect object pronouns are. And we'll also learn how to conjugate the verb offrir. I hope I can squeeze in everything that needs to be said about indirect object pronouns because it's kind of tricky to explain, and I only have just under 15 minutes to cover this, but hopefully it will make sense. If it still confuses you some way somehow, please write a question at the end of this lesson on the back of at the very bottom of that last sheet. Okay? All right, let's get started. All right, what are indirect objects? Pretty much an indirect object is the recipient of the direct object. It kind of sounds very convoluted, very tricky and complicated, but once I start breaking it down for you, it's going to make a little bit more sense. I'm not saying that you will understand everything all at once. You'll probably understand it better when I use English examples, but hang in there, okay? All right, so in order for there to be an indirect object, there has to be a direct object there to begin with. So let's go back to the example that I've used in our direct object sentence. All right, so we had Tom writes a letter, and I told you that for direct object, you want to ask yourself the question what, because direct objects answer the question what. Tom writes what? Tom writes a letter. Tom is the subject, writes is the verb. A letter is the direct object. It tells you what Tom is writing, and he is writing a letter, okay? And again, as you know, direct object answer the question what or who. Indirect object actually answer the to whom or for whom question, okay? So if we were to use that sentence again, Tom writes a letter. Tom writes what? He writes a letter. Therefore, letter is a direct object, which can be replaced by it to avoid repetition. But now if we were to add a recipient of this letter, that recipient will be your indirect object. For example, Tom writes his mom a letter. Tom writes a letter to whom? That will be a question. To whom is he writing the letter, or for whom is this letter? And the answer is his mom. Okay? The recipient of the direct object, the recipient of a letter is his mom, which can be replaced, his mom can be replaced by a pronoun to avoid repetition. So you can replace his mom by her. So you can rephrase your sentence by saying, Tom writes her a letter. Okay? I'm just giving you a frame reference in English so that maybe when I start introducing French sentences, you can make those connections. Okay? Again, your indirect object answer the to whom, for whom question. All right? All right. Verbs and indirect object pronouns. In French, you will always use a when you're talking about indirect objects. For example, in English, you don't have to say Tom is writing a letter to his mom. You can just say Tom is writing his mom a letter. So you can omit that too. In French, it doesn't work that way. You have to have that preposition a that indicate this quote-unquote to or for, that pretty much gives you a clue as to who the recipient is. Okay? As an example, Tom écrit une lettre à sa mère. Tom écrit une lettre à sa mère. Tom is the subject, écrit is the verb, une lettre is the direct object, because you can ask yourself the question, Tom écrit quoi? Il écrit une lettre. Une lettre is the direct object. To whom, for whom, pour qui? Ou bien à qui? À sa mère. Sa mère, the mother, is the recipient of that letter. Therefore, she is the indirect object. There are a couple verbs that are typically used along with indirect object, and those are verbs that translate the idea of giving and receiving and communication. Verbs like donner, offrir, envoyer, parler, téléphoner, dire. Those will pretty much have the donner à, offrir à, envoyer à, parler à, téléphoner à. So you always have that à along with your verb, because those are verbs that go together with indirect objects. And here is your table. Your table here will kind of look familiar in that some of the pronouns are the same as the direct object, but not in every case. Okay, so let's go with the first person, which is me or m apostrophe if the verb if the verb that follows starts with a vowel, me or m apostrophe, te or t apostrophe, lui either for a male or a female, nous for us, vous to you, leur to them. So these are indirect object pronouns that you would use for people who are the recipient of a direct object. For example, je te donne un cadeau. Okay? Je te donne un cadeau. I give you a gift. If I give you a gift, I am the subject. Give is the verb. A gift is the direct object. And then who receives it? It's you. So you are the recipient of it. In French, it would be je te donne un cadeau. So because you are the recipient, the indirect object pronoun would be te. If I change it to a third party and say I give him or I give her a gift, it would be je lui donne un cadeau. Je lui offre un cadeau. Je lui donne de l'argent. Je lui écris ou je lui envoie une carte. All of these verbs are verbs that have to also be used with indirect object pronouns. Okay? All right, moving on to verb placement. The verb placement is going to be following somewhat the rule that I've given you for the direct object pronoun, which is to place the pronoun right before the conjugated verb. So when you do that, it will kind of shift things around. It will modify the order of things. It will modify from the original sentence, but it will still have the same meaning. because you will simply replace the recipient by a pronoun. So for example, Tom écrit une lettre à sa mère. Tom writes a letter to his mom, or Tom writes his mom a letter. The recipient is his mom, à sa mère. And because we already know from this table right here that the recipient, whether male or female, can be replaced by the pronoun lui. Therefore, you will place your pronoun right before your conjugated verb. Tom lui écrit une lettre. Tom lui écrit une lettre. Make sure that you have filled in your blanks and that you've written down the example before moving on to the next slide. Now it's going to be your turn. You're going to replace the underlined words by the appropriate pronoun. Tom écrit une lettre à ses cousins. Which indirect object pronoun will replace à ses cousins? Ses cousins. And then the second one, Sophie donne une bise à sa meilleure copine. Which indirect object pronoun will replace sa meilleure copine? And then, once you have figured that out, you will place everything in the right order, starting with the subject, and then the indirect object pronoun, conjugated verb, and in the end, the direct object. Your direct object will be in the end. Okay, here's where it gets even more tricky, or it kind of becomes like some sort of headache if you are somewhat confused with the direct object pronoun and indirect object pronoun. But as we practice more and more, it will become a lot easier. Okay, so as you know, we can replace indirect object pronouns, and we also can replace direct object pronouns. So what happens when we replace them both in a sentence? How are we going to place these pronouns accordingly to the rule, and what goes where, and so on and so forth? Well, all I can tell you is to look at this model here, where you have the subject and you have the direct object pronouns, the indirect object pronouns, and then the verb. And what you need to remember and keep in mind is that your direct object pronoun will always go before your conjugated verb. If you don't understand this today, that's fine. We will get lots and lots of practice with this, so do not worry. It's okay. Alright, you're going to pause and you're going to watch the indirect object pronoun video. It's a very short clip. It's from the book basically, and you're just gonna watch it, and maybe it'll kind of help you understand a little bit better. It doesn't go very much into depth, but it's a little bit of help. And then once you're done with that, you can come back to the notes. Alright, now it's going to be your turn to practice. You will replace the underlined words with the correct pronouns. So it's going to be a mix of direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go straight to the verb that we're supposed to learn. And I'm just going to click pause so that you can get to see it real quick. After you're done taking these notes, you're going to go straight to the practice, and then you'll be done. And I'll see you on Tuesday. Bon weekend. Au revoir.